Hi, I'm Serafina Rossi. Last Christmas, my family made me enter through the back door like hired help while they entertained guests in their pristine dining room. What they didn't know was that I owned half the commercial buildings in downtown Florence, including the one their landlord rents his office from. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. When Signora Mancini walked into that kitchen and called me boss, in front of everyone, 30 years of their lives crumbled faster than their mortgage payments. They thought I was the family failure scraping by on maintenance jobs. Turns out I was the one keeping their landlord in business. The gravel crunched under my work boots as I pulled into the circular driveway of my childhood home in Fiesole. Even after all these years, the sight of that pristine Tuscan villa, with its perfectly manicured cypress garden and imported stone walkway, made my stomach clench. Not from nostalgia, but from the familiar ache of never being quite good enough for the picture they painted. I sat in my pickup truck for a moment, watching through the large bay windows as my sister Isabella glided through the living room in her cream-colored cashmere sweater dress, probably discussing her latest interior design project with our mother. The golden light from their chandelier cast everything in that warm, magazine-worthy glow that had defined every family gathering I could remember. Everything looked perfect from the outside. It always did. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Kitchen entrance, please. We have important guests today, and you know how you look after work." I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. How I looked after work. As if my success was measured by the cleanliness of my fingernails rather than the numbers in my business accounts. I grabbed the bottle of wine I'd brought, a 30-year-old Brunello that cost more than most people spend on Christmas dinner, and walked around to the back of the house. The kitchen door was already propped open, and I could smell the roast lamb and all the traditional fixings that Mom had been preparing since dawn. The familiar sounds of family chatter and clinking glasses drifted from the front of the house, where the real party was happening. Aunt Sophia was standing at the kitchen island, arranging appetizers on a silver platter. She looked up when I walked in, her face breaking into the first genuine smile I'd seen all day. "There's my girl," she said, pulling me into a warm hug that smelled like vanilla and cinnamon. "How's business been treating you?" "Can't complain," I said, setting the wine on the counter. "Closed on another property last week. A mixed-use building on Via da Tornabuoni." Sophia's eyes lit up. "That's wonderful, honey. You've built something incredible." She paused, glancing toward the dining room where we could hear Dad's booming laugh. "They still don't know, do they?" I shook my head. "Mom thinks I'm barely scraping by fixing leaky faucets and unclogging drains. It's easier that way." The truth was more complicated than that. 5 years ago, I'd started Rossi and Bianchi Property Management with my business partner, Marco, using money I'd saved from years of actual maintenance work and a small inheritance from my grandmother. What began as managing a few rental properties had grown into a full-scale commercial real estate operation. We now owned 6 apartment buildings and managed over 40 commercial properties throughout Florence. The maintenance work had taught me everything about building systems, tenant relations, and property values. Now I was the one hiring maintenance crews, but my family saw what they wanted to see. Isabella had married Luca Mancini, an investment banker who wore his income like a badge of honor. Mom never missed an opportunity to mention Luca's bonus checks or Isabella's expensive shopping trips to Milan. Meanwhile, they treated me like the family charity case, always offering to help me out or suggesting I might want to find a nice man to take care of me. "Serafina, there you are." Mom swept into the kitchen wearing her best hostess smile and a black dress that probably cost more than most people's rent. "I need you to help Sophia serve the appetizers. The Ricci's are here, and Carlo's business partner brought his wife. We want to make a good impression." "Of course," I said, though the irony wasn't lost on me. The Ricci's lived in one of my apartment buildings, though they had no idea their landlord was standing in this kitchen wearing work boots and jeans with paint stains on the knees. I followed Sophia into the dining room, carrying a tray of stuffed mushrooms and trying to ignore the way conversations paused when I entered. The dining room table was set with Mom's finest china and crystal, candles flickering between elaborate floral arrangements. Isabella was holding court at one end, describing her latest project, redesigning a client's summer home in the Amalfi Coast. "Oh, Serafina," Isabella said, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she wanted to sound caring but needed everyone to know she was doing me a favor. "I was just telling everyone about your little handyman business. It's so admirable how you're making it work." Luca nodded approvingly. "There's honest work in the trades. Not everyone can handle corporate pressure." He said it like he was patting a child on the head. I smiled and nodded, letting them have their moment. Signor Ricci took a stuffed mushroom from my tray and winked at me. "These look delicious." "Thank you, dear." If only he knew I was the one who'd approved his lease renewal just last month. "Serafina fixes things," Mom explained to Signora Connie, Carlo's business partner's wife. "Toilets, air conditioners, that sort of thing. She has such a practical mind." "How wonderful," Signora Connie said with the kind of smile people give when they're being polite about something they find slightly embarrassing. "Everyone needs a skill." I excused myself back to the kitchen where Sophia was pulling rolls from the oven. "You okay, sweetheart?" she asked, reading my expression. "Just the usual," I said. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I told them the truth. "Why don't you?" I thought about that for a moment. Because then they'd want something from me. Right now, they just ignore me. If they knew I had money, they'd find ways to need me. At least this way, I know where I stand. The back door opened, and Signora Mancini walked in carrying a covered dish. Gloria Mancini was one of my longest-term tenants, a retired teacher who rented a one-bedroom apartment in my first building. She was also one of the kindest people I'd ever met, always baking cookies for the other tenants and organizing community events in the building's common room. "I hope you don't mind," she said to Sophia. "Patricia invited me to bring my famous sweet potato casserole. I didn't want to interrupt the party in there." "Of course not," Sophia said warmly. "Gloria, this is my niece Serafina." Signora Mancini looked at me for a moment, her face breaking into a huge smile. "Serafina, I didn't recognize you out of your business clothes. How are you, boss?" The kitchen went completely silent. Sophia's eyebrows shot up. From the dining room, I could hear Dad in the middle of telling one of his golf stories, unaware that my entire carefully constructed cover was about to be blown. "Boss," Sophia repeated quietly. Signora Mancini looked confused. "Well, yes. Serafina owns my building. She's been my landlord for 3 years now. Best property manager in the city. I always tell people," she turned to me, "I hope it's okay that I came. Your mother was so insistent when she heard I lived alone." I felt the blood drain from my face. This was not how I'd planned to spend Christmas. "Landlord." Sophia's voice was getting louder. "Serafina, what is she talking about?" Before I could answer, Mom appeared in the kitchen doorway. "What's all the commotion back here, Gloria? Wonderful to see you. I hope you brought that casserole I've heard so much about." "Of course," Signora Mancini said brightly. "I was just telling Sophia how grateful I am to have Serafina as my landlord. She keeps our building in such beautiful condition and so reasonable with the rent increases, not like some of these corporate owners." Mom's smile froze on her face. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" Your daughter owns my apartment building on Via Cavour." "Actually, she owns several buildings, doesn't she, Serafina? I always see the Rossi and Bianchi signs on properties all over downtown." The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. I could hear my heart beating in my ears, and somewhere in the distance, Luca's laugh from the dining room where he was probably still talking about market volatility or interest rates. Mom's face had gone through several color changes, settling somewhere between pale shock and rising anger. "Serafina, what is this woman talking about?" I took a deep breath. This wasn't how I'd wanted this conversation to happen, but Signora Mancini had just blown my cover in the most innocent way possible. "Signora Mancini is one of my tenants, Mom. I own several rental properties in Florence." "Properties, plural?" Mom's voice was getting higher. "What do you mean you own properties?" "You fix toilets." "I also own the buildings those toilets are in," I said quietly, along with about 40 other commercial and residential properties throughout the city. Sophia let out a low whistle. 40 properties, give or take, I said. It depends on whether you count the ones we manage versus the ones we own outright. Mom sank onto one of the kitchen bar stools, staring at me like I'd just announced I was secretly an astronaut. But you dress like you work with your hands. You drive that old truck. I do work with my hands. Property management requires a lot of hands-on work. And I drive that truck because it's practical for hauling materials and tools. I gestured toward my clothes. I dressed down today because you told me to use the back door. I figured you didn't want me looking too successful in front of your important guests. Signora Mancini was looking back and forth between us, clearly realizing she'd stepped into something complicated. I should go, she said quietly. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. You didn't cause anything, I assured her. Would you like me to introduce you to everyone? I'm sure they'd love to meet you. Before Signora Mancini could answer, we heard footsteps in the hallway. Dad appeared in the kitchen doorway, followed by Isabella and Luca. What's going on in here? Sounds like someone's having more fun than we are. Don, Mom said weakly, using his first name. Sit down. You need to sit down. Dad looked around the kitchen, taking in Mom's pale face, Sophia's amused expression, and my defensive posture. What's wrong? Is someone sick? Your daughter, Mom said slowly, apparently owns half of downtown Florence. Luca laughed. What? Serafina? That's impossible. She fixes air conditioners. I own the buildings with the air conditioners that need fixing, I corrected, along with the heating systems, plumbing, electrical, roofing, and everything else that comes with property ownership. Isabella was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. You're joking. You can't afford to own property. You shop at thrift stores. I shop at thrift stores because I don't need to prove my worth through my clothing, I said. And I can afford quite a lot, actually. My business grossed about $2 million last year. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of the oven timer going off. Sophia calmly reached over and turned it off, then pulled out another tray of rolls like we were discussing the weather instead of my secretly successful real estate empire. Dad sat down heavily on one of the stools. $2 million gross, not net, I clarified. But yes, it's been a good year. We're expanding into commercial development next year. Marco found this great piece of land near the waterfront. Marco? Luca asked. He looked like someone had just explained quantum physics to him in a language he didn't speak. My business partner, Marco Bianchi. We started the company 5 years ago with money I'd inherited from Grandma Rosa. Mom's face went through another series of expressions. Grandma Rosa left you money when? How much? When she died 6 years ago. About 50,000 euros. You were all so busy with the funeral arrangements and dividing up her jewelry. Nobody asked about the separate account she'd set up for me. I shrugged. She knew I was good with money. She used to say I had her practical streak. 50,000 euros, Dad repeated slowly. And you turned it into a €2 million business? It wasn't magic, I said. I used the inheritance as a down payment on my first property, a duplex that needed work. I did most of the renovations myself, rented out both units, and used the income to buy the next property, then the next one. Marco came in as a partner when we decided to go commercial. Isabella was shaking her head. This doesn't make sense. If you have all this money, why do you live in that terrible apartment? Why do you drive that old truck? Why do you dress like what, Isabella? Like someone who works for a living? I could feel years of frustration bubbling up. I live in a perfectly nice apartment that I happen to own. I drive a truck that serves my business needs, and I dress appropriately for the work I do, which involves a lot more than sitting in an office making phone calls. But why didn't you tell us? Mom asked, and for the first time, she sounded hurt rather than angry. I looked around the kitchen at all of them. These people who'd spent years treating me like the family disappointment, who'd made me use the back door because they were embarrassed by how I looked, who'd never once asked about my dreams or goals or whether I was happy. When would I have told you? I asked quietly. During one of our family dinners, where you spend the whole time talking about Isabella's latest project or Luca's bonus. When you're introducing me to your friends as the daughter who fixes things, when you're explaining to people that I have practical skills like that's code for couldn't do any better? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Signora Mancini cleared her throat. I really should go. This feels like a family conversation. Please don't, Sophia said quickly. You're a guest. And honestly, this is probably the most honest conversation this family has had in years. Dad was still staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Serafina, I had no idea you felt that way. Of course you didn't, I said, because you never asked. You never asked about my business, my goals, my life. You just assumed that because I don't wear designer clothes and drive a luxury car, I must be struggling. You made me your charity project without ever checking whether I needed charity. We were trying to help, Mom said defensively. By making me use the back door, by introducing me as the daughter who fixes toilets, by constantly suggesting I find a man to take care of me. I could feel my voice rising. Years of suppressed frustration finally finding their way out. That's not help, Mom. That's humiliation. Luca was looking back and forth between me and Isabella like he was watching a tennis match. But why keep it secret, he asked. If you're successful, why not share that with your family? I turned to look at him directly, because I knew this would happen. I knew that the moment you found out I had money, everything would change. You'd start seeing me differently, start wanting things from me, start treating me like I mattered. But I didn't want to matter because of my bank account. I wanted to matter because I'm your sister, your daughter, your family. The words hung in the air like smoke. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the sound of simmering roast lamb on the stove, the distant sound of a dog barking in the neighborhood, all the normal sounds of Christmas afternoon while my family processed the fact that everything they thought they knew about me was wrong. Signora Mancini spoke up quietly. For what it's worth, Serafina is the best landlord I've ever had. When my heat went out last winter, she had someone there within 2 hours, even though it was a Sunday. When Signora Rossi on the 3rd floor was having trouble with her rent after her husband died, Serafina worked out a payment plan and never made her feel ashamed about it. She knows every tenant's name, remembers their birthdays, and she's never raised anyone's rent more than absolutely necessary. She looked around at my family. I don't know much about business, but I know about character. Your daughter has the kind of character that makes people feel safe and valued. That's rarer than money. Sophia reached over and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you, she said simply. I always have been. But now I understand why Grandma Rosa left you that money. She saw what you could become. Mom was crying now. Quiet tears that she was trying to wipe away without smudging her makeup. Serafina, I'm so sorry. We never meant to make you feel less than. We worried about you. You seemed so independent, so determined to do everything yourself. I am independent, I said. But that doesn't mean I don't want to feel like I belong in my own family. Dad cleared his throat. What can we do? How do we fix this? I looked around the kitchen at these people who'd shaped my entire life, who'd driven me to prove myself in ways they never even knew. Signora Mancini was still holding her sweet potato casserole, probably wondering if this was the most dramatic Christmas dinner she'd ever attended. Sophia was smiling through her own tears, looking proud and heartbroken at the same time. You can start by setting another place at the dining room table, I said finally. For both Signora Mancini and me, and maybe next time you can ask me about my life instead of assuming you already know the story. Isabella stepped forward, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Serafina, I'm sorry. I really am. I never realized. I always thought you were happy doing your own thing. I was happy doing my own thing, I said. I just wasn't happy being treated like my thing didn't matter. Luca was still looking confused, but he managed to say, I'd love to hear more about your business. Commercial real estate is fascinating. I almost laughed. Now it's fascinating. 10 minutes ago, it was fixing toilets. 10 minutes ago, I was an idiot, he admitted. Apparently, I still am, but I'm trying to be a better informed idiot. Despite everything, I felt myself smiling. That's a start. Mom stood up, smoothing her dress and trying to pull herself together. Well, then, I suppose we should properly set the table. Signora Mancini, I hope you'll forgive our family drama. This isn't exactly the peaceful Christmas I'd planned. Signora Mancini smiled. Honey, I raised 4 children and buried 1 husband. I've seen plenty of family drama. At least yours ended with good news. As we all started moving toward the dining room, Sophia hung back and caught my arm. Are you okay? She asked quietly. I thought about it for a moment. 30 years of feeling invisible, of being the family afterthought, of proving myself to people who never bothered to look. All of it had led to this moment, standing in my childhood kitchen, finally being seen for who I really was. Yeah, I said, and I meant it. I think I'm going to be just fine. The dining room felt different when we walked in this time. The same chandelier, the same expensive china, the same perfectly arranged flowers, but now there were 2 extra place settings. And when I sat down, it wasn't as the family charity case or the daughter who fixed things. I was Serafina Rossi, successful businesswoman, property owner, and finally, after 30 years, a full member of my own family. It wasn't the Christmas I'd expected, but as Signora Mancini passed her sweet potato casserole and Dad asked his first genuine question about commercial property values, I realized it might just be the Christmas I'd been waiting for my entire life. The following Monday morning, I sat in my office on the 3rd floor of one of my downtown buildings, staring out at the snow-dusted streets of Florence while nursing my 2nd cup of coffee. The weekend had passed in a blur of awkward family phone calls and text messages that ranged from apologetic to demanding explanations I didn't owe anyone. Marco walked in without knocking, which was his usual way of announcing himself. So, I heard Christmas got interesting, he said, settling into the chair across from my desk with his own coffee and a stack of property reports. I'd called him Sunday night to give him the abbreviated version of the family revelation. Marco had been my business partner for 5 years, but more than that, he'd become the brother I'd never had. He knew about my family's treatment of me, had watched me work weekends and holidays to avoid going home, had seen me build this business partly out of spite and partly out of a desperate need to prove my worth to people who'd never bothered to ask what I was worth. Interesting is one word for it, I said, turning back to face him. Mom called 3 times yesterday. Dad wants to discuss my business ventures over lunch. And Isabella sent me a text asking if I need help managing my finances. Marco nearly choked on his coffee. She wants to help you manage your finances? The woman who bought a $15,000 handbag last month. The very same. I pulled up the text on my phone and read it aloud. Serafina, I know this is all new and overwhelming. Luca knows some great financial advisors who could help. You make smart decisions with your money. Family discount, of course. Family discount, Marco repeated slowly. On advice for managing the money, they didn't know you had to invest in markets they assume you don't understand because they still think you're the little sister who needs taken care of. Exactly. I tossed my phone back onto the desk. It's like they heard the words successful business owner, but their brains translated it to lucky accident that needs adult supervision. Marco leaned back in his chair, studying my face. How are you holding up? Really? I considered the question. The truth was I felt hollowed out, not relieved, not vindicated, just empty. For years, I'd imagined what it would feel like when my family finally understood what I'd built. When they realized they'd been wrong about me, I'd pictured apologies, pride, maybe even a little awe at what their underestimated daughter had accomplished. Instead, I felt like I was watching them scramble to rewrite history, to find ways to make my success fit into their existing narrative about who I was supposed to be. Mom kept talking about how she'd always known I was special, as if 30 years of treating me like the family disappointment had been some kind of reverse psychology master plan. Dad wanted to discuss my ventures like they were hobbies that had gotten out of hand. And Isabella was already positioning herself as the big sister who could guide me through the complexities of having money. I keep waiting to feel vindicated, I told Marco honestly. But mostly I just feel tired. That's because you're grieving, he said quietly. You're grieving the family you thought you might have if they really saw you. Now they see you, and they're still the same people they always were. The phone on my desk buzzed with an incoming call. The display showed Patricia Rossi. I felt my stomach clench. It's Mom, I told Marco. Third call today. Want me to take it? He offered. I can pretend to be your secretary. I almost smiled at that. No, I should probably face the music. I picked up the phone. Hi, Mom. Serafina, sweetheart, I'm so glad I caught you. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I realize we have so much to catch up on. I was wondering if you'd like to come to dinner tonight. Nothing fancy, just family. I thought we could really talk. I glanced at Marco, who was making exaggerated gagging motions. Tonight's not good, Mom. I have a property inspection at 6. And then Marco and I are reviewing contracts for the waterfront development project. Oh, there was a pause. Well, what about tomorrow or Wednesday? I could make your favorite pasta al forno. My favorite pasta al forno? I almost laughed. Mom hadn't made pasta al forno in 15 years, and when she used to make it, she'd always complained that it was too much work for a Tuesday night. My actual favorite meal was the lampredato from the little place downtown that I ordered when I was working late. But Mom had never bothered to learn that. Mom, can I ask you something? I said, ignoring Marco's raised eyebrows. What's my favorite color? Your favorite color? She sounded confused. Well, you always looked good in blue. That's not what I asked. What's my favorite color? A longer pause. Blue. It's green, I said quietly. It's been green since I was 12 years old. Forest green, specifically. I told you that when you were redecorating my room for my 13th birthday, but you said blue was more sophisticated. Serafina, I don't understand why. What's my favorite book, Mom? Sweetheart, this seems... Just answer the question. What's my favorite book? You always liked to read. You had so many books. The Name of the Rose, I said. I've read it probably 20 times. I quote it when I'm nervous. You've never noticed. The silence on the other end of the line stretched uncomfortably. Marco was watching me with concern, probably wondering if I was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe I was. Mom, what's the name of my business? Your business? It's you and that Marco fellow. Rossi and Bianchi Property Management, I supplied. We've had the same name for 5 years. It's on every sign, every business card, every piece of correspondence. Serafina, what's this about? Why are you asking me these things? I closed my eyes, feeling suddenly exhausted. Because you want to have dinner and really talk, but you don't know anything about me. You don't know my favorite color, my favorite book, the name of my business, or what I actually do for a living beyond your vague idea that I fix things. You want to catch up on a person you've never bothered to know. That's not fair, Mom said, and I could hear the hurt in her voice. Of course, I know you. You're my daughter. Am I? Because for 30 years, you've treated me like a stranger who happened to live in your villa and show up to family dinners. You've introduced me to people as if I were a mildly embarrassing relative you had to acknowledge, but didn't really want to claim. Serafina, you're being dramatic. We've always loved you. Have you? The question came out harder than I'd intended. Or, have you loved the idea of me? The beautiful daughter who didn't ask for much, who didn't need attention, who could be counted on to stay in the background while Isabella shined. Marco was making wrap-it-up gestures, probably sensing that this conversation was heading nowhere good, but I couldn't stop. 30 years of swallowed words were finally finding their way out. Mom, do you remember my university graduation? Of course I remember. We were so proud. Do you remember what I graduated with? A pause. You graduated with honors, didn't you? I graduated summa cum laude with a double major in business administration and civil engineering. I had the 3rd highest GPA in my class. Do you remember the speech I gave at the award ceremony? There were so many ceremonies. I was the student speaker for the College of Engineering. I talked about sustainable development and affordable housing. You left early because Isabella had a hair appointment. We didn't leave early. Mom protested, but her voice lacked conviction. You left during my speech, Mom. I saw you go. The ceremony lasted another hour, But you weren't there when they called my name for the engineering award. The silence on the other end was deafening. I could picture Mom sitting in her perfectly decorated kitchen, probably still in her morning robe, trying to figure out how to respond to truth she couldn't deny. "I'm sorry," she said finally, and her voice was small. "I didn't realize." "That's the problem," I said. "You never realized. And now that you know I'm successful, you want to be part of it. But you can't be part of something you've never bothered to understand." I hung up before she could respond, immediately feeling guilty, but also strangely relieved. Marco was staring at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Feel better?" he asked. "I feel like I just kicked a puppy," I admitted, "but also like I can breathe for the first time in years." "Good," he said firmly. "It's about time. You stopped making excuses for people who never bothered making excuses for hurting you." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of normal business activities. We reviewed maintenance requests for our commercial properties, discussed a potential acquisition on Elmwood Avenue, and planned our presentation for the waterfront development project. Normal, productive work that reminded me why I'd built this life in the first place. Here, I wasn't the disappointing daughter or the sister who needed guidance. I was just Serafina, business owner, problem solver, someone whose opinion mattered. Around noon, my assistant, Julia, knocked on my office door. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "Says she's your sister." I looked at Marco, who shrugged. "Want me to stick around?" "Please," I said. "Send her in, Julia." Isabella walked into my office like she was entering a foreign country, her eyes taking in the hardwood floors, the exposed brick walls, the view of downtown Florence through the large windows. She was dressed in her usual expensive casual wear, a cashmere sweater and designer jeans that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "This is nice," she said, settling into the chair Marco had vacated. "Very industrial chic. It's a converted warehouse." "It's a converted warehouse," I said. "We renovated it 3 years ago. Office space on the upper floors. Retail on the ground level. We, Marco and I, we own the building." She blinked. "You own this building too? Isabella, why are you here?" She shifted uncomfortably, crossing and uncrossing her legs. "Mom's upset. She's been crying since you hung up on her." I didn't hang up on her. I ended a conversation that wasn't going anywhere productive. "She says you were mean to her, that you were asking her trick questions." I leaned back in my chair, studying my sister's face. Even now, even after everything that had been revealed, she was here to defend Mom, to make me the problem, to restore the family dynamic where I was the one who needed to apologize for having feelings. They weren't trick questions, Isabella. They were basic questions about my life, questions that any parent should be able to answer about their child. "But you know how Mom is," Isabella said, her voice taking on that wheedling tone she used when she wanted something. "She's not good with details. She loves you. She just shows it differently." "How does she show it? What do you mean? You said she shows her love differently. How does she show it? Give me one example of how Mom has shown me love in the last 5 years." Isabella opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked genuinely confused, like I'd asked her to solve a complex mathematical equation. She worries about you," she said finally. "Worrying isn't love, Isabella. Worrying is anxiety. What has she done that demonstrates love?" "She invites you to family dinners where she makes me use the back door and introduces me as the daughter who fixes toilets." "She doesn't mean anything by that." "Then what does she mean? If she doesn't mean to diminish me, what is she trying to accomplish?" Isabella was getting flustered, her perfect composure starting to crack. "Why are you being so difficult about this? Family is family. We all have our roles. And what's my role, Isabella? You're the practical one, the independent one. You don't need as much attention as the rest of us." There it was. The truth she probably didn't even realize she was telling. I was the one who didn't need attention, didn't need love, didn't need to be seen or valued or celebrated. I was the low-maintenance daughter, the one they could ignore without guilt because I was independent. "What if I told you I did need attention?" I asked quietly. What if I told you that being ignored for 30 years actually hurt quite a lot? But you always seemed fine with it? Isabella protested. You never complained. You just did your own thing. Because complaining would have made me the difficult daughter instead of the independent one. And you can't have two difficult daughters in one family, can you? Isabella's face flushed. That's not fair, isn't it? When was the last time you were told to be the bigger person? When was the last time someone suggested you should just let something go for the sake of family harmony? She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. We both knew the answer. Isabella, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer. Do you actually want a relationship with me, or do you want me to go back to being the sister who doesn't cause problems? She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her struggling with the question. Part of me felt sorry for her. She'd been raised to be the golden child, the one who deserved attention and praise and special treatment. She'd never had to examine whether that treatment was fair or what it cost other people. I want us to be a family, she said finally. That's not what I asked. I asked if you want a relationship with me, with who I actually am, not who you need me to be for your family picture to work. I don't know, she admitted, and I appreciated the honesty, even though it stung. I don't really know who you are. I know who you've always been in our family, but apparently that wasn't really you. No, it wasn't. So, who are you? I thought about that for a moment. Who was I, stripped of my role as the disappointment, the fixer, the one who didn't need anything? I'm someone who works hard because I believe in what I'm building, I said slowly. I'm someone who cares deeply about my tenants, who stays up nights when someone's heat goes out or when someone's struggling to make rent. I'm someone who reads constantly, who knows the lyrics to every Italian opera, who cries at commercials with dogs in them. I'm someone who's built something meaningful from nothing, who's created jobs for 12 people, who's helped families find affordable housing in a city where rent keeps going up. I paused, looking at Isabella's face. She was listening, really listening, maybe for the first time in our lives. I'm also someone who's been hurt by this family for a very long time, I continued. Someone who's tired of pretending that doesn't matter. Someone who's finally successful enough and confident enough to stop accepting crumbs and calling it love. Isabella was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the street below. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. I'm sorry, she said. I really am. I never thought about how it felt from your side. I know you didn't. None of you did. That's the problem. What do we do now? I considered the question. What did we do now? How do you rebuild relationships that were built on fundamental misunderstandings? How do you create authentic connections with people who'd only ever known a version of you that wasn't real? I don't know, I said honestly, but I know what we don't do. We don't pretend this conversation didn't happen. We don't go back to the way things were. And we don't expect me to be grateful for attention that only came after you found out I had money. That's not why, isn't it? Be honest, Isabella. If Signora Mancini hadn't walked into that kitchen, would you be here right now? Would any of you be calling and texting and wanting to have heart-to-heart conversations? She looked away, which was answer enough. I thought so. I stood up, walking to the window. The street below was busy with the usual Monday afternoon activity. People going about their lives, working, shopping, living in ways that had nothing to do with family drama or disappointed expectations. Serafina. Isabella's voice was tentative. What you've built here, it's really impressive. I mean that. Thank you. And I'm sorry it took us so long to see it. I turned back to face her. It's not just that it took you long to see it, Isabella. It's that you never bothered to look. There's a difference. She nodded slowly, tears starting to form in her eyes. I know there is. We sat in silence for a few more minutes, the weight of 30 years of misunderstanding settling between us like dust. Finally, Isabella stood to leave. For what it's worth, she said at the door. I'd like to try to get to know who you really are if you're willing. I'm willing to try, I said. But it has to be real, Isabella. No more family roles, no more expectations about who I'm supposed to be. Just two people figuring out if we actually like each other.
Deal, she said.
And for the first time in years, Her smile looked genuine. After she left, I sat alone in my office, watching the afternoon light shift across the floor. Marco poked his head in around 4 o'clock. "How'd it go with your sister?" "Better than expected," I said. "Still not great, but better." "That's something, I guess." "Yeah, it's something." The truth was, I felt cautiously hopeful. Not about my family suddenly becoming the loving, supportive people I'd always wanted them to be. That ship had probably sailed, but maybe, just maybe, we could build something new, something honest, something that didn't require me to be smaller, so they could feel bigger. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. "Free for lunch tomorrow? I'd like to hear about this waterfront project." I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, "Sure, but I pick the restaurant and we talk business. Real business, not you trying to give me advice I don't need." His response came quickly. "Fair enough. Looking forward to it." I set the phone down and smiled. It was a start. The lunch with Dad went better than I'd expected, which set off alarm bells in my head. Donato Rossi didn't do genuine interest without an agenda. He'd asked intelligent questions about the waterfront development, nodded appreciatively at my profit projections, and even seemed impressed by my expansion timeline. Too impressed, too interested, too suddenly respectful of a daughter he'd been ignoring for 3 decades. I should have seen it coming. The call came on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after our restaurant meeting. I was reviewing architectural plans for a mixed-use development when my phone rang. Dad's name on the display, but this time his voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. "Serafina, we need to talk. Can you come to the villa tonight?" "What's wrong?" I asked, setting down my coffee. Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. "It's complicated. Family meeting, 7 o'clock. He hung up before I could ask questions, leaving me staring at my phone with a growing sense of dread. Family meeting. In 30 years, we'd never had a family meeting unless someone was getting divorced or someone had died. Marco looked up from his desk across the office. "Bad news." "I'm about to find out." I grabbed my jacket. "I might need to leave early today. Something's going on with my family." "Want backup?" he offered, only half joking. "If I'm not back by tomorrow, send search and rescue." The drive to Fiesole felt longer than usual, my mind running through possibilities. Was someone sick? Financial trouble? Had they found out something about my business that I didn't want them to know? By the time I pulled into the driveway, my palms were sweating despite the December cold. The villa looked the same as always, perfectly maintained, Tuscan, with warm light spilling from every window. But tonight it felt different, more like a stage set than a home. I used the front door this time, a small act of rebellion that felt significant. Mom answered before I could knock, her face carefully composed, but her eyes red-rimmed. "Serafina, thank you for coming. Everyone's in the living room." Everyone. I followed her through the foyer, noting the way she kept glancing at me like she was afraid I might bolt. In the living room, Dad sat in his leather chair, Isabella and Luca on the plush sofa, and Aunt Sophia in the corner chair by the fireplace. The seating arrangement felt formal, choreographed. "Sit down, sweetheart," Mom said, gesturing to the remaining chair. "We have something to discuss." I remained standing. "What's going on?" Dad cleared his throat, the sound he always made before delivering news he knew wouldn't be well received. "Serafina, we've been talking as a family about your success, about the opportunities that might come from pooling our resources." "Pooling our resources?" I repeated slowly. "What does that mean exactly?" Luca leaned forward, his banker's smile firmly in place. "What your father means is that we've identified some investment opportunities that could benefit everyone. You've built something impressive with your real estate portfolio, but there's always room for strategic expansion." "I'm not looking to expand right now," I said carefully. "Marco and I are focused on the waterfront project." "But that's exactly what we're talking about." Isabella chimed in, her voice bright with forced enthusiasm. "Luca has connections with some major development firms in Rome. They're looking for local partners with established portfolios." I felt the first prickle of real alarm. "What kind of partnerships?" Dad stood up, moving to the mantelpiece where he kept his golf trophies and family photos. The kind that could turn your €2 million business into a €20 million operation. But it would require significant capital investment, more than you and Marco could handle alone. So we pool family resources, Mom added, her voice carefully neutral. Everyone contributes what they can. Everyone benefits from the growth. I looked around the room, really studying their faces. Dad's forced casualness, Mom's nervous energy, Luca's predatory enthusiasm, Isabella's brittle smile. Only Aunt Sophia looked uncomfortable, her hands twisted in her lap, avoiding my eyes. How much are we talking about? I asked. Well, Luca pulled out a folder, the kind he probably used for client presentations. Based on my analysis of your current holdings and the development potential of the waterfront project, we're looking at an initial investment of about €8 million. 8 million. The number hung in the air like smoke. And where would this 8 million come from? That's where the family partnership becomes valuable, Dad said. You'd leverage your existing properties as collateral. We'd each contribute what we can, and Luca's connections would provide the rest through development loans. I sat down hard in the chair Mom had indicated earlier. You want me to use my buildings as collateral for a loan to fund an investment scheme? It's not a scheme, Luca protested. It's a legitimate development opportunity. These Rome firms are major players. They're looking for exactly what you have. And what do I have, Luca? Established local presence, existing property portfolio, proven track record with renovations and tenant management. So, they want my reputation, my properties, and my risk tolerance, but they'll provide the vision and take the profits? Everyone would profit, Isabella said quickly. That's the beauty of it. We all succeed together. I turned to look at Aunt Sophia, the only person in the room who hadn't spoken. What do you think about this family investment opportunity? She finally met my eyes, and I saw apology there, and something that looked like fear. I think you should be very careful about mixing family and business, sweetheart. Sophia. Dad's voice carried a warning. We've discussed this. Yes, we have, she said firmly. And I've said my piece. Serafina's built something good, something stable. She doesn't need fixing. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. I could see the family dynamics playing out in real time. The way they'd probably been pressuring Sophia to support their plan. The way my success had suddenly become everyone's opportunity. Let me make sure I understand, I said slowly. You want me to risk everything I've built so that you can get rich off my work? That's not how we see it, Mom said quickly. We see it as family helping family. You've been independent for so long, carrying all this responsibility by yourself. We want to help by taking control of my business, by sharing in it, Dad corrected, by being part of what you've built instead of standing on the outside. There it was, the truth beneath all the financial jargon and family unity rhetoric. They wanted in. Now that they knew I had something valuable, they wanted their piece of it. What happens if I say no? I asked. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Luca shuffled his papers. Isabella examined her manicure. Mom looked at Dad, waiting for him to respond. Well, Dad said finally, we'd be disappointed. We think this is a real opportunity for everyone. But if I say no, you'll respect that decision, and we'll go back to our regular family dynamics. Another pause. This one longer. Of course, Mom said, but her voice lacked conviction. I stood up, walking to the window that looked out over their perfectly manicured backyard. The pool was covered for winter, the garden beds mulched and dormant. Everything neat, controlled, maintained according to plan. You know what I find interesting about this conversation? I said, not turning around. 3 weeks ago, none of you knew I had a business. You thought I was barely scraping by, fixing other people's problems, living in some terrible apartment. You were embarrassed by me. That's not true, Isabella protested. Isn't it? I turned back to face them. You made me use the back door, Isabella. You introduced me to your friends as the sister who fixes things like it was a medical condition. You offered to help me manage my finances because you assumed I was too simple to understand money. We were wrong, Dad said. We admit that. We underestimated you. And now you want to fix that by taking over, what I built while you were underestimating me. We want to be part of your success. Mom said, "Is that so wrong? We're family." Where was this family unity when I was working 16-hour days to buy my first property? Where was it when I was learning commercial real estate law from library books because I couldn't afford classes? Where was it when I was too tired to date, too busy to travel, too focused on building something that mattered to have any kind of social life? The room was dead quiet. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the sound of a car passing on the street outside. You weren't interested in being part of my struggle, I continued. But now that there's money involved, now that there's prestige and profit potential, suddenly you want to be family partners. Serafina, that's not fair. Luca said, business opportunities don't wait for perfect timing. When you see a chance to create wealth, you take it. Whose wealth, Luca? Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like a plan for you to create wealth using my assets and my reputation while I take all the risk. That's not how partnerships work, he said, his voice taking on a lecturing tone. Everyone brings something to the table. You bring the properties, we bring the capital and connections. What capital? I asked bluntly. What are each of you contributing to this €8 million investment? The silence was deafening. Luca's confident expression faltered. Isabella looked at her husband like she was seeing him for the first time. Dad's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. "We need to work out the specifics," Luca said finally. "So, you want me to risk my entire business portfolio on a partnership where the financial contributions haven't been determined and the profit distribution hasn't been negotiated? These things can be worked out," Dad said. "The important thing is to move quickly. Luca's contacts won't wait forever." I almost laughed. Almost. "Dad, do you know what my business grossed last year?" "You said 2 million. 2.4 million. Do you know what my profit margin was?" He looked confused. "I assume it was good or you wouldn't be successful." 38%. "Do you know what the average profit margin is for property management companies?" "I don't see why." 12%. "I'm running a business that's 3 times more profitable than industry average. Do you know why?" "You're good at what you do." Mom ventured. "Because I'm careful. Because I research every investment, negotiate every contract, maintain every relationship, and never make decisions based on pressure or emotion." I looked around the room at their faces. "What you're asking me to do violates every principle." That made me successful. Aunt Sophia was nodding slightly, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Everyone else looked like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. Isabella said, her voice taking on that wheedling tone again. "You're overthinking this. Sometimes you have to take risks to get ahead." "I've been taking risks for 8 years, I said. Calculated risks, researched risks, risks that I understood completely before I took them. What you're proposing isn't a risk. It's a gamble with my life's work as the stakes." Luca was getting frustrated, his professional demeanor starting to crack. "Look, I've been in finance for 15 years. I know a good opportunity when I see one. These Rome developers are the real deal." "What are their names?" I asked. "What?" "The names of these Rome development firms. What are they called?" Luca glanced at Dad, then back at me. "I can't share that information until we have a preliminary agreement in place. Client confidentiality. Client confidentiality. So, you want me to risk my entire business on a deal with unnamed partners for an unspecified project with undetermined financial contributions and unknown profit distributions?" "You're being deliberately difficult," he snapped. "I'm being professional. This is how business works, Luca. You don't sign contracts with question marks." Dad stepped forward, his expression hardening. "Serafina, I think you're forgetting something important. We're your family. We want what's best for you." "Do you?" "Because what's best for me is continuing to run my profitable, stable business the way I've been running it. What's best for you is getting access to my assets and income stream." "That's a terrible thing to say," Mom said, tears starting to form in her eyes. "Is it untrue?" No one answered. I walked back to my chair and picked up my purse. "I'm going to leave now, but before I do, I want to make something very clear. My business is not available for family investment. My properties are not collateral for family schemes, and my success is not a resource for you to exploit. Serafina, wait, Isabella said, standing up. Don't be hasty. At least think about it. I have thought about it. The answer is no. What if we sweeten the deal? Luca asked desperately. What if we adjusted the terms? I turned to look at him. This man who'd married into my family and apparently decided that gave him rights to my assets. Luca, let me explain something to you. I didn't build this business to provide investment opportunities for my relatives. I built it because I'm good at it, because I believe in it, and because it gives me independence from people who want to use me. No one's trying to use you, Dad said. Aren't you? Because from where I'm standing, this looks exactly like what it is. You found out I have money, and now you want some of it. You're not interested in my business. You're interested in my bank account. That's not true, Mom said, but her voice was weak. Then prove it. Tell me about my business. Tell me what Rossi and Bianchi Property Management actually does. Tell me about our tenant retention rate, our maintenance protocols, our expansion strategy, our community impact initiatives. Silence. You can't, can you? Because you don't care about my business. You care about my money. And there's a difference. I headed for the door, feeling lighter with every step. Behind me, I could hear urgent whispers, probably them trying to figure out how to salvage their plan. Serafina, Aunt Sophia called out. I turned back. I'm proud of you, she said simply. Thank you. This isn't over, Dad said, his voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. This family doesn't work if everyone just does whatever they want. I paused at the threshold, considering his words. Dad, this family hasn't worked for me in 30 years. I'm not sure what you think is going to change. We're your family, he said again like it was some kind of trump card. Being related to someone doesn't give you the right to their life, I said. Being family means supporting each other, not exploiting each other. And what you're proposing isn't support, it's exploitation. I left through the front door, not looking back at the villa where I'd grown up feeling like a stranger. In my truck, I sat for a moment in the driveway, letting the reality of what had just happened settle over me. They tried to take my business, actually tried to convince me to risk everything I'd built so they could profit from my success. The audacity of it was breathtaking, but what really stung was the way they dressed it up as family unity, as if wanting to exploit me was the same as wanting to include me. My phone buzzed with a text from Marco. How'd the family meeting go? I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway, watching the villa shrink in my rearview mirror. I'll tell you tomorrow, I texted back. But I think I'm about to find out what happens when you say no to people who aren't used to hearing it. The drive back to Florence felt like an escape route, each mile putting distance between me and the life they'd tried to trap me in. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't the same person who'd walked into that villa an hour ago. Something had shifted, hardened, crystallized. I'd spent 30 years trying to earn their love and respect. Tonight, I'd finally stopped trying, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely free. The feeling wouldn't last long. By the next morning, I discovered just how far they were willing to go to get what they wanted, and just how much they were willing to destroy to punish me for saying no. The first sign of trouble came at 6:30 the next morning. I was in my kitchen making coffee and reviewing the day's maintenance schedule when my phone started ringing. The number wasn't familiar, but something about the early hour made me answer. Signorina Rossi, this is Carla Bianchi from the Florence Housing Authority. I'm calling about some concerns that have been brought to our attention regarding several of your rental properties. I sat down my coffee cup, instantly alert. What kind of concerns? We've received reports about potential code violations, safety issues, and possible tenant harassment. I'm afraid we'll need to schedule immediate inspections of all your residential properties. Reports from whom? I can't disclose that information, but the complaints were quite detailed. We take these matters very seriously, especially when they involve multiple properties owned by the same landlord. I felt my stomach drop. When do you want to schedule these inspections? We'll need access by Monday, all 6 residential buildings. Our inspectors will need full access to common areas in any vacant units, and will need to interview current tenants about their living conditions. Of course, I managed. I'll make sure everything is accessible. Thank you. And Signorina Rossi, if these violations are substantiated, you could be looking at significant fines and possible suspension of your rental licenses. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, my mind racing. 6 months ago, I'd had routine inspections on all my properties. Everything had passed with flying colors. My maintenance logs were meticulous. My tenant relationships were excellent. And I'd never had a single complaint filed with the housing authority. Marco arrived at the office an hour later to find me surrounded by property files, inspection reports, and maintenance records. "What's the crisis?" he asked, setting down his coffee and taking in my frantic organization. "Housing authority. Someone filed complaints about all our residential properties. They're doing emergency inspections Monday." "All of them? That's impossible. We just had Signora Rossi's building inspected last month when she had that minor plumbing issue. Everything was perfect." "I know, but someone gave them detailed reports about code violations and safety issues. Detailed enough that they're treating this as a serious investigation." Marco sat down heavily in his chair. "Who would do that and why?" Before I could answer, my phone rang again. This time it was Carlo Bianchi, my insurance agent. "Serafina, I'm calling about your commercial liability policy. We've received some concerning information about your business practices, and I need to discuss whether your current coverage is adequate." "What kind of information?" "Claims that you've been operating outside standard industry practices, potentially exposing both yourself and your tenants to unnecessary risks." "Nothing official yet, but my underwriters are nervous." "Carlo, you've been my agent for 4 years. You know how I run my business. What specific practices are they concerned about?" "Well, there are suggestions that you've been cutting corners on maintenance, housing tenants in substandard conditions, and possibly violating fair housing regulations." I felt the walls closing in. "Carlo, that's completely false. You've seen my maintenance records, my tenant satisfaction surveys, my inspection reports. Everything's documented. I believe you, Serafina, but perception matters in this business. If there's an ongoing investigation, my company might need to reassess your risk profile." "Is this about the housing authority inspection?" "Among other things." "Look, just get through the inspections, document everything, and we'll revisit your coverage once this blows over." After he hung up, I looked at Marco. "Someone's trying to destroy my business. But who? And how do they even know enough about your operations to file detailed complaints?" The answer came to me like a punch to the gut. Someone who's been asking a lot of questions about my business practices lately. Someone who's had access to my family for weeks, asking innocent questions about how I operate. "Your family?" Marco said quietly. "Luca. He's been pumping everyone for information, probably framing it as due diligence for their investment scheme." And when I said no, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your email. You might want to see what people are saying about your business practices." I opened my laptop and found my inbox flooded with forwarded social media posts, review site complaints, and what looked like coordinated negative publicity. Someone had created fake accounts to leave scathing reviews on every platform where my business was listed. Slumlord disguised as caring landlord charges premium rent for substandard apartments, refuses to make necessary repairs, discriminates against elderly tenants. Each review was detailed enough to sound credible, specific enough to seem authentic, but contained just enough inaccuracies to prove they were fabricated. The person writing them knew enough about my properties to sound knowledgeable, but clearly hadn't actually lived in any of them. "This is systematic," Marco said, reading over my shoulder. "Someone spent time researching your properties, your business model, your tenant demographics. This isn't random trolling." My landline rang. It was Signora Costa, sounding upset and confused. "Serafina, dear, I just had the strangest phone call. Someone claiming to be from a tenant advocacy group asking about problems with my apartment, whether you've been responsive to maintenance requests, if I feel safe in the building." "What did you tell them?" "The truth. That you're wonderful. That the building is well maintained. That I've never had any problems. But they kept pushing, asking if I was sure, if maybe I was afraid to speak up because you might retaliate. Did they leave a name or a number? They said they'd call back, but Serafina, it felt wrong, like they wanted me to say there were problems even when there weren't. After she hung up, my phone immediately rang again. It was Signor Bianchi from the Via de Tornabuoni building. Signorina Rossi, I got a weird call this morning. Someone asking about my rent, whether it's fair, whether you've been discriminating against older tenants. I told them, you've been nothing but professional. But they seemed disappointed by that answer. Then Signora Ricci, then the university students in the Via Cavour duplex, then Signor and Signora Russo. Every one of my tenants had received calls from people fishing for complaints, people who seemed surprised and frustrated when the tenants had nothing but positive things to say. By noon, I had a clear picture of what was happening. Someone was trying to manufacture a case against me, creating fake complaints, encouraging real complaints, and trying to pressure my tenants into finding fault with their living situations. Marco was furious. This is harassment. This is defamation. This is probably illegal. It's also smart, I admitted grimly. If you want to destroy a property management company, you attack their reputation, their licenses, and their insurance. You make it impossible for them to operate, even if they're doing everything right. But why? Even if your family is angry about the investment thing, this seems extreme. My phone rang again. This time it was Dad. Serafina, we need to talk. There seem to be some serious problems with your business that we weren't aware of. Problems that didn't exist until yesterday, I said coldly. What do you mean? I mean, someone's been making phone calls, filing false complaints, and trying to manufacture problems where none existed. Someone who's been asking detailed questions about my business operations for weeks. Silence on the other end. Dad, did you know Luca was planning to sabotage my business if I didn't agree to his investment scheme? That's a serious accusation, Serafina. It's also true. My tenants are being harassed, my insurance is being questioned, and the housing authority is investigating complaints that were filed less than 12 hours after I left your villa last night. Maybe these are legitimate concerns that needed to be addressed. Dad, are you seriously suggesting that my business went from perfectly legal to dangerously negligent overnight? I'm suggesting that maybe you're in over your head, and maybe Luca's connections could help you navigate these challenges. There was the quid pro quo. Let them into my business or watch them destroy it. Is that a threat, Dad? It's an observation. Business can be complicated. It helps to have experienced people on your side. People like Luca, people like family. I hung up without another word. The message was clear. Submit to their scheme or face the consequences. Marco was staring at me. They're actually trying to blackmail you. Not blackmail, coercion. They're creating problems that they can then offer to solve, as long as I give them what they want. That's extortion. That's family. The rest of the day was a blur of phone calls, document gathering, and damage control. I contacted every tenant personally, explained that there might be some unusual attention on the properties, and asked them to document any harassment they received. I compiled maintenance records, inspection reports, and financial documents to prove my business practices were above board. I scheduled emergency repairs on minor items that could potentially be flagged during inspection, even though they were well within acceptable parameters. By evening, I was exhausted but prepared. My properties were immaculate, my paperwork was perfect, and my tenants were supportive. If the housing authority wanted to inspect, they'd find a model operation. But I also knew this was just the beginning. If Luca and my family were willing to go this far, they wouldn't stop at housing inspections. The next morning brought confirmation of my fears. A call from my bank. Signorina Rossi, this is Davide Rossi from Banca di Firenze. We need to discuss some concerns about your business accounts. What kind of concerns? We've received information suggesting that your company might be involved in some questionable financial practices. Nothing official, but enough to trigger our internal review protocols. What kind of information? Allegations of rent skimming, security deposit violations, possibly some tax irregularities. Again, nothing proven, but we need to be cautious. Davide, you've handled my accounts for 3 years. You've seen every transaction, every deposit, every business expense. Everything's documented and legitimate. I know. And that's why I'm calling you directly instead of just freezing the accounts. But I need you to know that we're under pressure to take these allegations seriously. Pressure from whom? I can't say specifically, but someone with apparent knowledge of your operations has raised concerns about compliance issues. After he hung up, I sat in my office staring out at the street below. They were attacking every aspect of my business systematically: regulatory compliance, insurance coverage, banking relationships, public reputation. It was sophisticated, coordinated, and ruthless. Marco walked in with a grim expression and a folder full of papers. "It gets worse," he said, sitting down across from my desk. "Someone's been calling our contractors, our suppliers, even our attorney, asking questions about our business practices, suggesting there might be legal problems ahead, recommending that they might want to distance themselves from us." How many have we lost? 3 contractors so far, and Fiore Supplies is asking for payment up front instead of our usual net 30 terms. Word is spreading that we're under investigation for what? Everything. Code violations, financial irregularities, tenant harassment, fair housing violations. It's like someone sat down and made a list of every possible way to attack a property management company. I leaned back in my chair trying to process the scope of what was happening. In less than 48 hours, they'd managed to create a crisis that threatened every aspect of my business. It was impressive in its thoroughness and terrifying in its implications. Marco, what happens if they succeed? If they actually manage to shut us down? You lose everything. The properties, the business, the income stream. Even if you eventually prove your innocence, the damage would be done. Rebuilding would take years, if it's even possible. And then they swoop in to help me pick up the pieces as long as I'm willing to accept their partnership terms. Exactly. They destroy your independence, then offer to save you from the destruction they caused.
My phone rang.
Isabella's name on the display. "Serafina, I just heard about the Housing Authority investigation. Are you okay?" "No, Isabella, I'm not okay. Someone's trying to destroy my business, and we both know who." "What are you talking about?" "I heard there were some legitimate concerns about your properties." Legitimate concerns that didn't exist until I refused to let Luca access my assets.